Between the mountains of Ethiopia, where time seems to hold its breath and faith is carved into every stone of the monasteries, there lives a secret that has stirred curiosity and wonder for centuries. We all think we know the childhood of Jesus and the public voice that burst forth when he reached about 30 years of age. But what happened in that long hush stretching almost 2 decades? That silence is a canyon in the story, a gap that millions have tried to bridge with guesses, legends, and forgotten manuscripts. Here is where the ancient Ethiopian Bible, guarded deep in Africa, steps into the light with a narrative that dares to break the silence. It is a text thick with symbolism, prohibitions, and enigmas, one that preserved what official tradition chose not to say. In its pages we glimpse not only the traces of a young traveller moving among sages and pilgrims, but the echo of a teacher in formation, someone who understood the power of words long before the world called him the Messiah. If this already has you leaning in, consider joining the True Light community so you do not miss the next chapter we uncover. What you are about to hear is not just another tale. It is a thin crack in time, a hidden passage that invites us to look into what was once forbidden. For centuries, countless believers quietly accepted a mystery that feels like an abyss within sacred history itself. We are told about a child in Nazareth, wise at 12, astounding the temple teachers in Jerusalem. And then suddenly, a man of 30 appears, with a voice that shook deserts and kindled hearts across Judea. Yet between those two moments stretches nearly 20 years of silence. Why? Who chose to close that door? What secrets were tucked away behind an absence that almost seems designed to provoke more questions than answers? If this is sparking new thoughts for you, tap like so I know to bring more of these deep dives to the channel. That void in the life of Jesus has become one of humanity's most enduring enigmas, and it is no accident that a memory of it survived in a distant land, within a people who guard their faith with grit and reverence. Ethiopia, there, in rock-hewn monasteries and sanctuaries that appear to rise from the earth's own ribs, a treasure is preserved that many have never even heard about, the Ethiopian Bible. It contains the familiar Gospels, yes, but also writings that were labelled dangerous, cast aside as heresy by those who needed to control the story of faith. Among those banned manuscripts lives what many regard as the key to the hidden years of Jesus. If you want to keep exploring these overlooked sources, subscribe and ring the bell so True Light can keep guiding you through them. Picture the scene. Monks in white robes, faces weathered by the mountain sun, bent over leather codices that have been safeguarded for centuries. This is not rumour passed around medieval taverns. These are ancient texts breathing with age, written in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopia, bridging us to Africa's earliest Christians. In them, a younger Jesus steps beyond the borders of Nazareth. He travels. He seeks wisdom in foreign lands. He lives among sages and learns from traditions that would later resurface in his teaching. The official narrative is silent here, but these echoes portray a restless youth who did not stand still. And it makes sense. What purpose would it serve the carpenter's son to remain pinned inside a workshop while the world burned with questions? The Ethiopian Bible whispers of journeys into distant regions, of visits to temples in Egypt, and of long conversations with scholars in Alexandria, that sea-washed city where scrolls hid the knowledge of Greeks and Hebrews, and where philosophy braided itself with faith. At such a crossroads, he may have drawn from a spring that would later trickle through his parables. The texts do not stop there. They hint at contact with secluded communities, perhaps even the Essenes. that austere brotherhood dwelling in desert caves, devoted to fasting, study, and the hope of a coming Messiah, compare their way of life with what Jesus later preached: simplicity, purity of heart, a fierce call to justice. The resonance feels undeniable, as if he trained in a school of silence and contemplation. If this connection intrigues you, drop a comment with your take. Could these encounters have shaped his voice? What tradition leaves unsaid? Ethiopia murmurs between the lines, and not out of whim. These manuscripts were shared in secret precisely because they were risky. From the earliest councils, the Church sought one authorized storyline, a straight path no one could challenge. The canonical Gospels were chosen with care, while other texts were pushed into the shadows. But in Africa, far from Rome's reach, some seeds endured. Those seeds describe a Jesus more human and more searching, closer to a living man than to a distant myth. Imagine what it means if Jesus did not simply appear fully formed with unearned wisdom, but forged it in the grit of life, traveling, listening, learning. If you are finding value here, share this video with someone who loves history and let them into the conversation. Picture him absorbing the culture of Egyptian priests, maybe hearing ancient African chants, seeing poverty and splendor side by side, and realizing that his mission could not be contained by a single village or even a single people. It had to open its arms to the whole world. The Jesus sketched by the Ethiopian manuscripts is not an invention for shock value. He is a piece that fits the puzzle of silence. The strength of these pages lies in how they unsettle us. Accepting their existence forces us to ask what the official history hoped to hide. Why fear a young seeker of wisdom? Why resist the idea of a Messiah who learned from others before teaching? Power prefers certainty, not questions. Finished tales, not open truths. But seekers like you and me, this is where we wake up. By the way, I have a companion video that expands on the monastic tradition in Ethiopia. Check the card or the description to keep the thread going. Every line pulls us from our sleep. Every word insists the story is unfinished, that voices remain which refuse to be buried. This is not an attack on faith. It is an invitation to its depth. Perhaps the path of Jesus was far more human, closer, and paradoxically more divine. The Ethiopian Bible, weighted with centuries, gifts us a different image. A young man who tempered his spirit in contact with African, Eastern, and Hebrew wisdoms. By the time he reached about 30, he carried not only a mission, but also the hard-won knowledge and lived experience to change the world. If this perspective is opening doors for you, hit like. It tells me to keep unsealing archives like these. These are not idle rumors. They are fragments of a shattered mosaic, pieces some tried to hide, yet they found refuge on African soil. Think of the monks who risked their lives copying every word by hand, generations who hid scrolls under stone and soil, aware they were protecting a treasure meant for all humanity, not a chosen few. Now, centuries later, those pages return to us, and as we open them, we sense we are not alone. We hear the footfall of a young traveller on dusty roads, searching, doubting, learning, preparing to shoulder the heaviest destiny a person could face. That is the Jesus the Ethiopian Bible lets us see. Not a myth conjured from nothing, but a man who crossed a long silence to become one of history's most powerful voices. If you want more content like this, subscribe to True Light and turn on notifications. This is where forgotten stories find their way back to you. Ethiopian monasteries guard more than scrolls. They keep a flame, the fire of a memory that refused to die when others tried to bury it. There, the overlooked manuscripts help complete the portrait of those hidden years when Jesus stopped being only a prodigy and began to take shape as a universal teacher. The accounts describe journeys into foreign lands where he did not merely listen, he questioned. Some passages speak of encounters with Egyptian sages and of witnessing rituals that left a lasting mark. He watched ceremonies that honored both life and death and recognized the human ache to overcome darkness. Through such experiences, he understood that his path would not be that of a mighty king or a conquering general, but of a bearer of light, one who breaks chains without raising a sword. The texts also place him among humble villages, learning from farmers, breaking bread with those who knew only scarcity. That nearby reality, raw and unpolished, would seed the compassion that overflows in his parables. Because a message without experience is just noise, but a message born from hunger and hope is almost impossible to extinguish. The Ethiopian Bible preserves fragments of dialogues, early teachings, even hints that Jesus already sensed the weight of his calling. Here is the most provocative idea. During those years, far from hiding in obscurity, he was learning to become the voice of the voiceless. Not a sudden miracle, but a long road of trials, stumbles, and discoveries. If this resonates with you, tell me in the comments which moment of his journey speaks most to your own. Think about it. If the Son of God moved through a process of learning, of making mistakes, of searching in quiet, what does that say about us? It says, the path to truth is not handed to us finished. We walk it with courage, thirst, and a willingness to face what it is uncomfortable. Jesus did not wait for truth to fall from the sky. He walked toward it step by step, land by land, until he was ready to share it with the world. For those who want to go further, I have a playlist that explores early Christian communities across Africa and the Near East. Continue there after this video to keep your momentum. These long-guarded manuscripts challenge the official view because they present a deeply human Jesus, a young man who laughs, listens, and wonders, someone who does not fear crossing borders and who widens tradition rather than shrinking inside it. That very humanity is what makes him greater. His divinity does not hover far away, but burns like a flame that any of us could ignite with the same devotion. Some scholars have dismissed these writings as apocrypha, fantasy, or a product of cultural mixing. Yet the question remains, why were these texts preserved in Ethiopia, isolated for centuries from the grand theological disputes of Europe, with such fierce care? Perhaps because, for that people, Jesus was not a remote myth, but a living presence woven into mountains and villages. If their memory was guarded with such loyalty, what right do we have to dismiss it without first listening? If you are still with me, share this episode with a friend who loves nuanced conversations. Help this story travel. The power of these manuscripts is not in replacing faith, but in enriching it. They show us Jesus in motion, in formation, in pursuit. He does not appear from nowhere with perfect answers. He plunges into the pain and wisdom of his time and rises transformed. That process teaches us that greatness is rarely instant. It is built in the dark, in the quiet, on roads few dare to take. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Had these texts been accepted from the beginning, the image of Jesus we carry might be very different. Not only God made man, but the man who became worthy of his mission through learning, sacrifice, and relentless searching. Perhaps that is why they were hidden, A Jesus who learns, errs, and grows is a mirror too close for those who prefer him untouchable. But now that we know such pages exist, there is no going back. Every line in the Ethiopian Bible is a call to look beyond the official tale, to understand that silences also speak, that gaps also teach, and they teach that truth, no matter how often it is smothered, always finds a way to breathe. Today, after centuries, those manuscripts sharpen our vision and invite us to something larger, to follow the example of the young seeker who refused to settle for what he was told and stepped out to learn, to question, to live. That hidden legacy is the courage to search. If you have made it this far, it is because you too are a seeker of truth. True light exists for exactly this, to rescue forgotten histories, to reveal what power tried to bury, to crack the wall of silence. Join us by subscribing, not as a hollow gesture, but as part of a community that dares to look beyond the surface. Leave your thoughts below. What part of this journey challenged you most? And if this message lit a spark, pass it on. There are still many African truths the world needs to hear, and together we can keep uncovering them.